This is Stephen McMurtry, and you're listening to the Empowered Podcast, episode 33.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Empowered Podcast. I'm your host, Ellery Wells, and this is a fantastic day to be alive, isn't it? This is the podcast to help you develop, grow, and overcome any challenge or obstacle that you're facing in your life. And if today's podcast doesn't convince you that today is worth living, that life is short, and you really need to go out there and make the most of it, I don't know what will. Today's episode is with a friend of mine, Elaine, and she and I met at New Media Expo. I had mentioned in a panel that I was looking for people who had really overcome something, a defining moment in their life or a situation that, could make or break a person and their personality. And Elaine came up to me after the panel and shared her story with me, and I knew it was one that I wanted to share with you on the podcast. You see, in 2008, Elaine had a traumatic brain injury. She was in a car wreck. I won't give you any more details. I'll let her share that with you here in just a second. But she had this traumatic brain injury that drastically changed her life, where she was headed, and, her personality, as a matter of fact. She now blogs about her experience, and she chronicles her recovery journey as she is a cyclist all up and down the West Coast in California. And without any further delay, I'll go right into the interview with Elaine. Stick around at the end. I've got a few things to touch base with you on, and here we go. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Empowered Podcast. I'm here with Elaine Astrue, and Elaine had a traumatic brain injury a few years ago, and she has an amazing story to tell us. The injury had changed her life, and now she blogs about her journey of recovery in her way to help people who have faced an injury, a similar injury, or something a little different. Elaine, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Ellery.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. For everybody that knows, a little rattled. All of a sudden, my technology crashed, and that doesn't usually happen. So, trying to get back on track, and Elaine has been patient enough to work through all of my technology issues. So, Elaine, take us back in time a little bit. I think it goes back to around 2008 or so. Tell us a little bit about the injury and what happened.
Yeah. Well, it was 5 years ago, Christmas Day. So it was 2008. It was Christmas Day. And basically, I was in a car that was headed down Interstate 5, which is the major north-south artery here in California. And we were outside of Bakersfield, California, and there was no visibility on the road. Basically, there was a really strong wind, and it was blowing all this sand and dust from the side of the road into the road, and it was amazing. You really couldn't see. And so what ended up happening is there was an accident in front of us. We avoided that accident, and then there was another accident that we hit. Because nobody could see anything. And what happened was when our car hit the other car, we were probably going about 35 miles an hour. And I was in the back seat, and I didn't have an airbag, and my head hit the front of the seat in front of me, the passenger seat. That's what I was behind. So basically, it was very interesting because I didn't black out or anything. And there used to be this way of categorizing brain injuries called the Glasgow Coma Index, I think is what it's called. And that basically traditionally said that if you don't lose consciousness, then you don't have a brain injury. It was one of their measurements of brain injury that you black out. And I didn't black out. What happened to me is I got out of the car as fast as possible and stood in a field next to the highway, and I was just stunned. for probably about 15, 20 minutes, just processing or not processing everything going on around me, but just
Because of
standing there.
the wreck or
Yeah,
the impact to your head?
the impact to my head. So my nose was bleeding really badly, and somebody gave me something for that, and I ended up with 2 black eyes, but I didn't actually lose consciousness. So nobody really knew what the extent of my injury was. And that's something about brain injury that comes up again and again as a really important theme, is that brain injury is invisible. Mild brain injury, anyway. Most people, when they think of brain injury, they think of someone in a wheelchair where you can really visibly see that their brain isn't operating as usual. Because they have trouble sort of moving their mouth normally, or they can't talk, or one eye is sort of not focused, or so you have a visible sign. Well, most brain injuries are not like that. They're invisible. And so there was a process for me, even acknowledging that there was an injury.
How long was it before you realized, hey, something's not quite right?
I realized there was something wrong. This was Christmas Day, so my company was shut down for Christmas, and so around about the second week of January, the beginning of that week, was when I was supposed to go back to work. And that first morning, I tried to pack my bag to go to work. I was a bike commuter, so I biked back and forth to work. And so it's a little bit complicated on the front end in the morning getting out of the house. So you have to get everything you need in your bag. And I just couldn't keep a list in my head of what needed to go in there.
And how long did you say it was after the wreck?
That was about 10 days after.
So nothing major other than just discomfort and
Right.
the black eyes and
right. I was bruised all over from the seat belt and black eyes. So there was physical discomfort, and I was sleeping an enormous amount, like 12, 14 hours a day.
Which is probably not a good thing in retrospect.
Well, it's one of the ways that the brain tries to heal. It is actually a symptom of brain injury, the sleeping thing.
So fast forward 5 years or almost 6 now, and how has this changed your life? Because when we met, and for everybody listening, Elaine and I met at New Media Expo. I keep coming back to going to these conferences. You got to do that. So Elaine, when we met, you said that your brain injury has become a gift. It's changed your perspective on that. Tell us, why do you call it a gift now?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Because that's essentially what the blog is about. When something happens to you, there's a real temptation and a sort of tendency to look at it as a negative thing. And I was determined that there was going to be something positive, and that I was going to look for the positive things in this, because basically I went back to work after my brain injury, but a couple years after that, it became clear that I couldn't do my job anymore, really. I was trying really hard, but it wasn't happening. So I had lost a lot of things. I had lost my job. I had lost my income. I had lost sort of the self-esteem that comes with earning your way in the world, and the social connections at work. And I had lost my health insurance. I had lost some family members who were also involved in the accident. I had lost my sense of myself, and the injury itself was a frontal lobe injury, meaning I hit the front of my head. And so,
and that's personality too, right?
Absolutely.
In the frontal lobe?
Absolutely. It's who you are, your sense of self. So I could operate pretty well in the world for a little while among people who didn't know me very well, where the demands weren't so great. But under stress, I just sort of lost this ability to perform at the level that I was performing. So there were a lot of losses, and I just had to take a look at this and say, look, I just can't focus on that, because if I did, well, the word that they use is tsunami in dealing with brain injury. They talk about the brain injury itself being the earthquake, and then all of the losses that happen after as a tsunami of losses,
Wow.
basically. So the challenge became like, find what's good about this. And I noticed that once I started doing that in even a small way, it grew and grew and grew. Like even talking to you after New Media Expo, and you said, tell me how it's become a gift. I just couldn't stop thinking of ways that it's become a gift. So
Awesome.
it's been an amazing process. And so I just have to pick a few of these to talk about.
Yeah,
Tonight,
absolutely.
I'm not sure how to pick them, but
Go through as many
yeah.
as you want. You know, I'm
Okay.
sure there's someone listening to this right now, which of course will be in the future, who needs to hear all of the uplifting reasons that you came up with. So go through as
Okay.
many as you want.
Okay. So I think I'll go from outward in. So one of the things that I sort of lost was my my persona in the world. So that my outward persona. So the first thing that happened to me in the accident is that I realized that life is really so fragile and short. I looked at the accident scene, I was stunned, standing next to the road, just, my face bleeding, looking at the scene thinking, this is what it looks like when people die. They die out here in the middle of nowhere with the wind blowing all around and cars strewn all over the highway, strangers they don't know around them. This is how people die. And it gave me this sense that I have to make something positive out of my life. And that sounds like a really basic thing that a lot of people come to, but I hadn't really come to that, not in the same way in my life. It was really, stark, and it keeps coming back to me over and over. So
Yeah.
that's the basic thing. And then the second thing is that, in dealing with the social impact of this injury, empathy is really the most undervalued human quality. I mean, you can see many more things with your heart than you can with your eyes or your thoughts, I think. And I really notice when people do not have empathy or aren't able to empathize. And so I've really come to value it tremendously.
Yeah, as soon as you go through something or know someone, you see the world a little bit differently. It was let's see, we're in 2014, so I think it was the 4th of July. 4th of July of 2012, and my dad had a stroke, and he couldn't move the right side of his body. He still kind of can't. He doesn't really talk anymore. His personality, he's still cheery, but
Yes.
He's different. I mean,
Yes.
completely different. And he went from being independent to being at home, and all of a sudden, like, the emails are like,
Yes. They
it's just
dropped
an
off.
email.
Yeah.
Like, are you serious? You're gonna email me about fill in the blank when I've just spent the last 2 weeks at the hospital with my dad?
Yeah.
And I'm sure the thing, or your injury, and just like in a previous episode, we talked about Paul Cardall, who had born with only half of a heart. It changes your perspective on the world, and the things that used to matter so much, you realize how little they matter in the long run.
Right. I know it sounds, I don't know how to make this sound unique, but it happens over and over again. And one of the things that I really came to is that when you're dealing with your own disability, um, I don't know about your dad's injury. That is a brain injury too, by the way, a stroke.
Hmm.
And I don't know what it's like for him, but what I came to is we are more than our thoughts. We are more than it seems we're capable of, because I felt that I was really still in there. I was really still myself, even if I was sort of unsure of some of those pieces of myself that I did remember them, and I did remember many things. It's just that my executive function, so the parts of me that did planning, organizing, sequencing of tasks, multitasking, those sorts of things, they were really compromised. But inside, I was the same person. And so it gave me this sense of like, we're more than our functioning in the world.
Mm.
And that's what I come to, like when I get those sort of looks from people who want me to behave a certain way, or they send an email expecting a certain kind of response. They expect you to be kind of interested in their topic or whatever. They expect it to be your priority for the day. Um, there really is this deeper set of priorities, I think, for us as
Yeah.
human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about the project on your website is route66ajourney.com, or maybe it's Route 66 depending on what part of the country or world you're from. But you're a cyclist. Are you still a cyclist? And what is the journey part? Because that sounds pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, totally. So in some cases, I wrote the blog to help other people. I wrote it to help myself. I started it to help myself, but basically, I felt like I had a pretty good case scenario for a brain injury, even though I had persistent symptoms after the accident. After 6 months, I was still having symptoms, but I still felt, even though those people are called the miserable minority, I still felt like I had the best case scenario. And so I felt a responsibility to do what I could to share what was going on with this journey. And one of the things that I kept reading about, because I can read, and I can write, so that's a good case scenario for a brain injury. One of the things I kept reading about is all this research about how exercise helps your brain, and it helps after a brain injury. And I was a cyclist before the injury, an endurance cyclist. And so I felt really, really lucky that I had basically a road bike in my garage, and I had some experience that I just needed to patch back together into a habit of doing cycling again. So for the first year, I didn't really ride my bike. And in fact, for the first 4 months, I didn't ride my bike to work and back. I couldn't bike commute. I just couldn't. I was full up, basically, mentally. But after that, I felt that when I went for a long bike ride, my thinking got clearer after. And so I was basically able to validate this research on the brain, in the first person. And I thought, I have to write about this. And also, I need the blog in order to motivate myself to ride my bike. Motivation is one of the things that's typically affected by this type of injury. And that was definitely true for me. So I needed motivation. So I started by riding my bike from the Bay Area down to Los Angeles, solo, and then
That's a long ride.
yeah, it's a hard ride too. It's on
How,
the blog. it
wow, how far is
it
that?
rained.
Oh
It's
man.
okay.
Did you go down
Highway
at,
one.
at
Highway
there you
one.
go.
So normally we
Wow.
have really nice weather in April, but a big storm came in, and so then I met this group, and they started at the Santa Monica Pier, and we rode the western half of Route 66. So for 18 days in a row, we rode about 80 to 100 miles a day, some of it is unpaved, and it's sort of a voyage of discovery too. When you take this old route, there's lots of interesting things to see and do.
So how did you pick yourself up and 'cause I'm sure a lot of people who go through something like that, they just kind of settle into, for lack of a better term, they settle into the injury, if that makes sense, and that just becomes, it kind of consumes who they are. How did you pick yourself up and say, there's more to me than this? It's a part, but I want to share my experience for the next person. I want to have the blog and want to talk about cycling and how it clears my head. How did you move past settling in to your injury to doing all of this?
Well, that I'm not totally sure of. I think it's because I have one person in my life, my partner Danny, who believes in me and accepts me for who I am, regardless of my executive function or whatever. And because I was experiencing a lot of rejection at this time, and the impulse to fight back, that's a good impulse, but it's not really enough, in my opinion. It's not like a creative impulse necessarily. You can think, well, I'll show them I'm a real person, but it's not, it doesn't really work like that. So I think having one person who really valued me for who I am is how it started. Then my blog wasn't very big, and it's still sort of small medium, but a woman sent me an email after about, I don't know, 2 or 3 months. And she had had a brain injury, and she had found me by searching the web. She had been at a baseball game in the Bay Area, and a stray ball had hit her in the head.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really weird. But she told me how much my story meant to her, and she told me that she was basically crying uncontrollably just reading it. And that one piece of feedback also pulled me on. So there's a lot of support out there, but there are some of these sort of key interactions that drove it. I don't really understand it myself. I just knew that settling into the injury was not an option. I mean, if you know me, before the accident, I was really a type A sort of person, and the bar is very high. If you worked on my team, you would work hard and you would feel motivated, but you would work hard. And I just had to do that with myself. There's a bunch of leadership interviews on your site, and I thought that was very very great as well when I was looking at your site, because leadership training has helped me in ways that if I can't fully verbalize, mainly leading by example. Mm-hmm. And lead yourself first, manage yourself first. If you expect the world to be a better place, be a better person in it,
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you were in the session with Pat Flynn and Cliff Ravenscraft.
Yes.
Who, one of the things that they were asked is if they could trace back to their moment of when they realized what they were doing mattered. And Pat Flynn told the story of someone, I think the guy had lost his arms and his legs or was born without them. And through reading Pat's blog, realized that he could do more and be more.
Yes.
And then it sounds like the feedback that you got from this lady just really, really, whether it just took it to the next level for you, that you realized that you were making an impact, and it kind of keeps it puts gas in the car, right?
Totally.
It moves things forward.
And in talking to you about it, I realized it didn't take that much, but what I needed was this really sincere connection. Both somebody who was in my life every day, encouraging me. Danny reads every blog post, but also somebody out there who doesn't know me, who validated this. And so I'm going to be I'm launching a podcast hopefully in March where I'll be talking to other survivors of brain injury and let people hear the voices of people who have been through something like this and hopefully learn from them.
That's awesome. You'll have to let me know when it launches, because that's a very specific target market. But I think the upside there for you and your audience would be massive. Just realizing you're not alone in going through whatever you're going through.
Totally.
And realize there's a community there for support for people who have, come out brighter and better on the other side, or at least figured out a way to cope with it and not let it get the best of them. So
true. I do feel like I'm better. I don't mean total recovery. Recovery is a bit of a myth from brain injury. When you recover, you're probably a little bit different. But in terms of being a human being, I think I'm better because everything got reordered and reorganized, and I got to make some choices about who I was. And I don't think I told you about this, but I was walking on the street, I was supporting a bike event. So one of the gifts, the mundane gifts, is that I had more time because I lost my job. So I started supporting other people in cycling events. And somebody asked me at one of these events, he said, "Is there anything you're better at now than you?" Yeah, because I was that kid in school that the other students hate. I always had my hand up. I always had straight A's. I had, I went to an Ivy League school. I mean, I was like type A. So anything I'm better at, I'm better. I'm a lot better at judging people. Like my instincts about people are so much sharper. Because they can be talking one thing, and before the accident, I used to focus on what they were saying, literally, as if that were reality. And now I'm sort of taking in the whole picture of the person and sort of judging them according to instinct, basically. And it's so much more reliable. This is something that Jill Bolte Taylor also says. Jill Bolte Taylor is a neuroscientist researcher who had a stroke. I highly recommend her book, My Stroke of Insight. She basically said after her stroke, she had to eliminate people from her life who didn't have her best interests at heart, no matter who they were, or no matter like how much she liked them, whatever. So she describes a doctor that came to her hospital room when she was coming back from her stroke, and she just could tell that he was not invested in her success, and she said, you just have to remove those people from your life. And I would agree with that. So I'm better in that way as well.
Yeah, that's good advice in general.
No kidding, but I found it really hard to do. I was very much more of a by the book sort of script template sort of person. And now I have a real reason to do that. And the last way I'm better is I think I take immense pleasure in small things, just small things that are wonderful, like a bee on a flower or something like that. It sounds corny, but it just makes me so happy. And being happy used to take a lot more.
Yeah. When your priorities are shaken up and realigned, you definitely see the world differently. Elaine, one of the questions that I'll try to ask everybody who comes on the show is about the word empower. What does the word empower mean to you?
Yeah, I listened to a few of the great answers on your podcasts, and I don't have a great answer, but I'll give it a go. To me, there's two kinds of empowerment. One is like inside yourself, and one is when you're empowering someone else. And because I was trained as a manager and a leader, I tend to think of that second way first, when you're empowering someone else. But I think it's sort of finding your purpose. If you think about the kind where you're empowering yourself, it's finding who you were meant to be in the world. I think if you're really honest about that and you're really authentic about that, it sort of flows like a spring of water inside of you. You can't keep it down. It's not something where you have to actually put power in or plug it in. It's like it just comes.
That's awesome. That's a great image. I think imagery is the right word that I'm looking for there. Just to release the power and the beauty that you have inside, instead of looking externally, and like you said, helping other people and finding something that you're passionate about.
Yeah, and I can tell on your site that you're passionate about what you do, and I can feel it when I go there, actually feeding me as well. And I think that we all have something like this that we can bring to the world that's unique. So,
well, thank you. I agree. I think somewhere in the middle between birth and wherever we are today, we lose that. We hide it. We don't want to get made fun of, or we don't want to get ridiculed or criticized. And I agree. We all have something that we're supposed to do, or a contribution that we're supposed to make, or maybe a person that we're supposed to encourage. And somewhere, I don't know, for me, maybe it's like around 8th grade or something, you just get teased for being into video games or
yep.
whatever, because it's not the cool thing to do. And then you just kind of hide it or don't bring it up again for 30 years. So
yes, I know. I think it's really pretty common. And I think it takes a lot of work to actually get back in touch with it. And that's been a gift as well, that I've been able to start that journey.
So, and Elaine, now that it's been 5 years, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, or 5 years since the injury, and you touched on it a little bit. Since you've decided that you want to do the blog and you want to encourage other people and share what you've learned about traumatic brain injuries, is there anything that you have stopped doing?
You mean in terms of things that are bad for my brain, or in terms of things that are displaced, or?
Any of the above. One of the things that I was thinking of or had in mind was when you said you had to stop being around people who you knew you didn't have your best interests in mind.
Yeah.
Is there anything else like that? Usually people answer this question with like, I had to stop watching TV or, but I think you might have a little bit of a different perspective on that. So anything that you've stopped doing?
It's really funny that you use that as an example, because people with brain injuries tend to love TV.
Okay, there you go. So what's your favorite TV show? What did you pause to answer the Skype call from me?
The Good Wife is my favorite.
Okay.
But yes, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I have stopped doing. I've had to give up some things, partly because of my mental bandwidth is limited, and so I have to choose priorities, but also because there was some post-traumatic stuff after the accident, so I try to take public transit whenever I can. I know that that's not possible for many people in the US, but I happen to be lucky. I live in an urban area, and I notice that it gives me more mental space. I've had to stop shopping. I never really was a shopper before, but now shopping really is too overwhelming. And, that's kind of a good thing, because that creates a lot more time in my life. I've had to stop being sort of critical as my first impulse. I think I was person who criticized things fairly harshly. And now to accept myself in my new sort of life or whatever, I've had to become more accepting. So I've had to give up sort of that knee-jerk criticism reaction.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good answer, really, but
No, I think it is. No one's ever told me stop. I don't think anyone's told me to stop criticizing. But if you're going around criticizing everything, you're automatically not looking at the positive side of things.
well, that's
So
I mean, somehow you just know this, but I did not. I thought I knew everything, but I did not know this. Somehow you know it. And I actually, when I was preparing for this interview, I went and got this book that I happened to read. I happened to run across as part of sort of reinventing myself. And it's a book called The Tao of Abundance by Lawrence G. Bolt. And he's a sort of a life coach before the social media revolution took off, and he's an Eastern philosopher, but I wasn't really into that part of it. I just was sort of struck by the title, and it's all about sort of viewing the universe as an abundant place, a place full of good things, rather than seeing the lack of something. And
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and it's not a small book, and I was just reading it thinking, oh my gosh, this is just so timely that I'm reading this right now, because just twisting your perspective a little bit like that, taking away the sort of need to find a lack of something and finding what the abundance is there is so powerful. So that I think that's a message of hope for people who
Awesome.
have brain injuries and for people who are just dealing with challenges of all kinds.
I will track down that book and put it in the show notes if you're listening to this. Elaine, what was the last movie you saw?
I don't remember. See, that's another brain injury answer.
That'll work. I'll
But
put
I
doesn't remember.
I don't know. I don't see that many movies. I don't see that many movies. Um,
That
but
works
we
too.
have an old movie theater near us, and actually, it was the Marx Brothers' Day at the Races, which is fairly hysterical.
I have not heard of that movie, but I'm glad it was a funny one. Elaine, what is one tip or piece of advice that you can give? Maybe two. Let me ask for two pieces of advice. Anyone for the advice for someone who has gone through a traumatic event, how they can pull themselves out of that, and then for people like me who haven't faced a trauma, but maybe we need to realign our goals to really what's important. Maybe could you give us those two pieces of advice?
Wow.
I've never asked for anyone for two, so
Okay.
you're the first one.
Someone who has been through a traumatic event, I'm a real sort of believer in self-sufficiency. If you know about cycling and you know the kind of cycling that I do, it's very long distance, and you the focus is on being self-sufficient. There's no following car. You have to know how to fix the bike, you have to know how to eat, all these kinds of things. But I would say to anyone who has been through a traumatic event, if it's just happened, find help. Rely on other people. Assume there will be someone with good intentions who has been through it who can help you. And I think you will find that person. I found those people at a brain injury nonprofit near me, Services for Brain Injury. They completely understood. They completely understood what I was going through. And when everyone was calling me a fraud, basically I was being treated like a fraud at the doctor's office, and the insurance companies still are treating me like a fraud, and my employer was treating me like a fraud. These people knew that I was authentic and good, and what I was going through was real, and it had this very powerful sort of catalyst effect on me. Very important to find help, I would say. And then once you've found help, I would say, as soon as you can, take responsibility for the outcome for you of what's going to happen in your life because of it. Because there really is no end of good things that will happen. It's infinite. The number, like I told you, that I started thinking of the gifts, and I wrote you email after email, and then I was like, I have to stop writing him emails, but I just couldn't stop thinking of the good things. And that is what happens. That is what happens. For people not affected by a traumatic event who want to turn things around, you mean? They want to find something significant in their life?
Sure.
That's what the second question is?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, it took a traumatic event to do that. So I would say, don't wait. Be proactive. So I was reading Pat Flynn's site as well, because I met him at New Media Expo, and I'm listening to his podcasts, and he has a section on what he would do differently if he started today. And he said that he started his smart passive income blog in reaction to being laid off. And if he were to do it again, he would be proactive. And that is such a huge thing. Someone as successful as Pat Flynn and accomplished and smart, he realized that it's great to have a reaction to a life event, but it's inspired to do it before something bad happens.
Yeah, we don't have to wait for a tragedy to make a change.
No, there's no virtue in waiting for a tragedy to happen.
Yeah, I like that. Well, Elaine, thank you so much for spending time with me this evening. I've benefited so much from just hearing your story and your optimism, and I'm so glad you're doing better. And will there be a time where things get back to like 2006, 2007 time, or is this kind of the new normal for you?
Yeah, really good question. I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody can tell. Every brain injury is unique, and every person does their own journey coming back from it. I will say I'm starting to apply for jobs again, and I feel pretty functional. We shall see.
Awesome.
It's an ongoing process, and you get benefits even 5 years out, 10 years out. I know somebody who was through a brain injury. I'll interview her for my podcast, but it was like 13 years ago or so, and she says there are still things that are getting better for her.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, definitely keep me updated with the podcast. I think that is such a cool idea, and I think you can have just a significant impact from there. If someone wanted to reach out to you and thank you for hanging out with Ellery and being on the Empowered podcast, where can I send them?
Well, I would love that, but I'm Elaine at Route 66 a journey, one word, .com. And it's been totally an honor and a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, me too, Elaine. You have a wonderful evening, and thanks for hanging out with me.
Bye-bye.
Man, what an episode. I told you it was going to be incredible. I love how Elaine said there at the very end, it took a traumatic event for me, so I would say don't wait, be proactive. So many times we look at our life and we're like, man, there's so many things that I want to do, and we're just waiting for something to happen. But whenever we do that hypothetical exercise, like if you had 30 days to live, or you had 90 days to live, or you had a terminal illness or something, and the amount of time that you have left on this earth was known, and it was short. We think we would change all of our habits, and we would do all the things that we wanted to do, and spend time with the people that we wanted to spend time with. More time with family, more time with loved ones, doing the fun things, travel the world. why do we have to wait for a traumatic event to pursue our dreams in those areas, or to spend the time with the people we should be spending time with anyway? I don't know. I look back at my life over the last 10, 15 years and wonder, had I known then some of the things that I know now, would I be sitting here today doing a podcast? Now, I love doing the podcast, but maybe I would have spent more time with my dad. Maybe I would have spent more time traveling, or doing other jobs instead of working at corporate America inside all the time. I don't know, but my encouragement to you would be something very similar to what Elaine said. Don't wait for an event to happen to you. Be proactive and really start living the life that you could be living if you just made that choice. Thank you for listening to the episode today. One thing I wanted to mention, I have a new free ebook for you if you are at all interested. I have taken all of the epic questions that I ask at the end of all of my episodes with people like Pat Flynn, Cliff Ravenscraft, Amy Porterfield, Elaine's here, and some of these really fantastic bits of information, or inspiration rather, and I've put them into a new ebook. If you want to grab that, go to ElleryWells.com/epic, and you can download that ebook and just really get motivated. Some really great success tips from self-starters out there who are really doing some incredible things. Thank you again for listening to this episode of the Empowered Podcast. I'm your host, Ellery Wells. You can find me over at ElleryWells.com, or if you want to connect with me, my new Twitter. I just changed the name on my Twitter. It is now at Ellery Wells, and my Facebook is all Ellery, or Facebook.com/Ellery Wells. It's all Ellery Wells now. So you won't have any trouble finding me whatsoever. Oh, and one last thing. I started another podcast. If you are looking for 5 to 10, maybe a couple 15-minute episodes of really dense, good information of inspiration, encouragement, motivation to really step out on your own, become the master of your destiny and the architect of your own success, I started a podcast just for you. It's been going since the beginning of April, so I've got 30-something episodes out right now, but you could knock them out just in a couple hours if you wanted to. That would be just an injection boost of adrenaline and motivation for you. But you can find that over starting at ElleryWells.com/CY1. That stands for Choose Yourself in Episode 1. All of those links and more over at ElleryWells.com. I hope you are having a fantastic day. Go out there, make something happen, develop yourself, grow, and overcome any challenges that you might be facing. I'll see you next week.